in Africa, there are people who are happy to sit in quagmire and mess. I mean, what is that all about? Could somebody somewhere explain to me why a group of young people will sit and all around them is a whole load of mess and they are just sitting there? And if you think I'm angry, it makes me absolutely friggin' mad. It is unacceptable. Unacceptable. And all it took was a group of young people, children, go picking up these, sweeping the streets. But you know, the part of our problem, of course, you know, I've been discussing with all sorts of people, why is it that we have so many apparently lazy, good-for-nothing people just sitting around our streets doing nothing? I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is a failure of leadership. Yes, it is a failure of leadership. And that's why I'm quite excited about you young people on this course, because I'm looking to you guys as the future leaders of Africa to change this, because it is unacceptable. I hope that you are angry. It is unacceptable. So we are looking to you people to change our future generations as the future leaders of Ghana. Right, thank you for allowing me that rant. I got that off my chest and I'm a much happier man now. Prevalence of inactivity in sub-Saharan Africa, you see here that people from Congo, anyone from Congo, apparently they are very, very lazy in Congo. Africa, in South Africa, they are lazier still. Both their men and women are not doing very well at all. In Ghana, apparently the women are lazier than the men. Actually, I don't agree. I don't agree. I think the men are far lazier than the women. And these are corresponding figures here. But physical inactivity is a complete disaster. This is some comparative data now of activity, not inactivity now, but activity. So metabolic equivalent, or METs, just measures how much energy you are expending, okay, through physical exercise. So if you're South Africa, South Africans are really lazy. Mauritius, that's why they get so much heart attack. Not only are they fat, they're lazy as well. And the Congolese are not doing any better. Ghana is in there somewhere. Look, apparently the Ethiopians are even better still. Tobacco smoking. Now, I hope I don't have to convince any of you here that probably one of the craziest things you can do in human existence is to smoke. I mean, if you're here and you smoke, you need your head looking at. Okay? Come and see me later because you need a psychiatrist. Because quite frankly, it's a complete disaster if you smoke. Because if you don't get lung cancer, you're going to get heart disease. You're going to get heart disease, you're going to get prostate cancer or stomach cancer or any number of cancers or a stroke or, it affects everything. It's a complete and absolute disaster. The only advantage that I can see is that you stink of nicotine. That's about the only advantage of cigarette smoking. And this is some data, again, across Africa, and you can see that current smokers are amongst males. Ghana is there, 10%. It's actually not as bad compared to somewhere like Zimbabwe or somewhere like South Africa. Mauritius and Seychelles always do very badly. And you've got other areas that are shown here. Nigerians are just above us. Africans, interestingly, generally have got a slightly lower cholesterol compared to our Western counterparts, with a relatively higher high-density lipoprotein. So you would think that we are slightly better protected when it comes to cardiovascular disease. The problem is that the actual numbers themselves don't always tell you any story. And I can tell you as well that, in fact, the vast majority of people that I see with heart attacks tend to have pretty average cholesterols. If you listen to the pundits, you may sometimes go away with the view that you need a very high cholesterol in order to have a heart attack. So I have lots of patients who come to me and say, I've had a heart attack, why? My cholesterol is normal. Well, guess what? In fact, the vast majority of people with heart attacks have got pretty normal cholesterols. Okay. So I don't want you to go away thinking because Africans have got average lower cholesterol levels that gives us some superior protection. May a bit, but not a huge amount. These are the mean cholesterols I told you about for females and for males across the countries. And you can see that actually, when you compare us to the West, we're actually a lot better in terms of the actual figures. HIV/AIDS is important to mention purely because, of course, there was an epidemic and there are lots of people in terms of numbers with HIV. And HIV itself actually promotes atherothrombosis. The drugs that are used in treating HIV are also atherogenic. They actually increase the bad cholesterol and can actually promote atherogenesis. So I see a lot of HIV patients now. They don't die, of course, of AIDS. They are now dying of heart attacks. A lot of them are dying of heart attacks. There is some good news, however. Some good news. I've been a bearer of bad tidings. Now I'm going to be a bearer of good tidings. Because for those of you who like a tipple, a bit of alcohol is actually good for you. So, if you don't consume any alcohol at all, there's a 3% increase in your cardiovascular risk. And a 16% increase in your risk of stroke. Provided you keep within the alcoholic limits. And the problem, of course, is that a lot of people are not disciplined enough to keep within these limits. And the limits are 14 units per week for women, 21 units for men. In fact, in some countries, it's come right down to 7 and 14. But the fact is that a little bit of alcohol is actually a vasodilator, and vasodilators are generally good because they reduce the amount of work your heart has to do, and cardiovascularly can be protected. The problem is that the more you drink, the more of a problem it is in obviously affecting your liver, affecting your stomach, and if you drink a lot, affects your heart as well. You can develop what we call alcoholic cardiomyopathy. A lot of alcohol is also pro-atherogenic. So if you drink a lot, you've got a problem. And if you are very disciplined like me, then you can take a bit of a nice bit of a glass of wine in the evening. It's all right. Okay. So there is some good news. There's some good news out there. The advice is, if you're not disciplined, please keep away from alcohol completely. So, alcohol, moderate alcohol consumption associated with reduced risk. High levels, of course, particularly binges, increases risk. So this is a sort of table that you can come up with at the end of what all that I've said: smoking, alcohol, exercise, obesity, blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, stress levels, family history, ethnicity. You can actually develop a cardiovascular risk profile, okay, and give yourself a very fair assessment of where you are. So, in summary, at this stage, 40 years ago, Bradlow and colleagues stated that Africa provided a vast natural laboratory for study of the etiology, that's how ischemic heart disease is caused, as well as the epidemiology, which is prevalence and incidence data on ischemic heart disease. That hasn't changed at all. And there is this scarcity of data makes a mockery of the case for agitating greater action plan to combat ischemic heart disease in sub-Saharan Africa. The point is, what Bradlow and co were saying is that it's time for Africans to wake up to this epidemic, and it's time for our people to start gathering serious data in order to do something about this epidemic. We need the epidemiological data, and we need to start by establishing cardiac registries in all our centers. The pace of economic development, rate and urbanization, and changes in life expectancy means that ischemic heart disease is going to be a major problem. We have an opportunity now for concerted action to tackle this emerging epidemic. Just a couple of things, a couple more things about these risk factors I've been talking about, which is that risk factors tend, it is relatively rare that you get these risk factors being on their own. These risk factors tend to hunt in packs. So, for example, 60% of adults with diabetes have high blood pressure. In some data sets, it's a lot higher. Nearly all adults with diabetes have one or more cholesterol problems. This is some data, this is published now some 17 years ago, you see here. But you can see here that in this data set, only a quarter of these patients had just one cardiovascular risk factor. The rest, nearly 3/4, had 2 or more cardiovascular risk factors for both men and women. And unfortunately, that's bad news, because with each risk factor you accumulate, these are what are known as Kaplan-Meier curves. Kaplan-Meier curves gives you an idea of survival with years on the x-axis. And you can see here that if you've got 0 cardiovascular risk, you live almost forever. If you've got 1 cardiovascular risk, your rate of dying is there, and so on and so forth. But you can see that the more cardiovascular risks you accumulate, the more likely you are to die. And that's true for both men and women. So, you don't know where you are on here, and what you need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is obviously to make sure you tackle these risks. And there are any number of screening. If you haven't got coronary artery disease, if you're sitting there now, totally asymptomatic, you've got no symptoms, you've got no idea what's going on in your coronary arteries at the moment. Okay. There are things that you can actually do to find out. The difficulty has always been at what stage we implement screening programs and at what age. And I'm not going to provide you with solutions. We can discuss that later on. But when one ought to start screening for these cardiovascular risks is actually quite difficult. And there are reasons for that. We can discuss that later. But these are slightly frightening statistics, because 50% of all heart attacks happen suddenly. There's no warning. You have no idea. One day you're sitting there watching TV or having benku and porridge, and then bang, you have the heart attack. Okay? And that is the problem. Traditional risk factors only predicts 2/3 of cardiovascular events. So how do we detect this disease? And that's really what I want us to occupy us with in the next 5 minutes or so. There are any number of biomarkers. There are ECG, calcium score. There are any number of things that we can use to detect, even before patients present with symptoms. I won't bore you too much with some of these facts, because some of them are slightly more technical, but suffice to say that there are any host of blood tests that we can do. There is the box standard ECG, which can give you some idea. Unfortunately, the ECG, if it's normal, doesn't help you at all. The vast majority of patients with coronary disease have got completely normal ECGs. So resting ECGs, if it's normal, please don't kid yourself into thinking that there's nothing going on. Okay? Treadmill testing is basically where you stress the heart and you measure the ECG at the same time. That is, if it's abnormal, it's useful. If it's completely normal, in some groups, it's very useful. In other groups, not so useful. But a treadmill test starts to answer the question. There are other things like a heart scan, which you can do both at rest and also on stress. This patient, for example, the heart should be contracting, should be doing this, and it's really not doing very much at all. This is a heart that's suffered a heart attack, and it's now like a football, it's just wobbling. This poor chap hasn't got long on planet Earth. Okay? His days are very much numbered. There are other tests like nuclear scanning that can be done. Then there is carotid intermedial thickness, which can also be done, where you use ultrasound to look for at the artery in that supplies the brain. There are looking at calcium in your coronary arteries using CT scanning is also a very good way of prognosticating, of telling you where you are with regard to cardiovascular risk. And these are things that can be done. You can see here, there's the artery supplying the front wall of your heart. You can see here, there's a bit of calcium, there's disease there in that part of the artery. And there's very good correlation now between the CT angiography and ordinary angiogram. You can see how beautiful that is delineated. I will skip this. The bottom line is that the hardening of the artery inside is not, let me just go back. The hardening the amount of narrowing, unfortunately, doesn't tell you the whole story. Okay? So the size of the plaque itself doesn't tell you the story. So size doesn't always matter, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? The type of plaque, it is the type of plaque that matters, rather than the size of the plaque. So this is a camera inside the coronary artery, and that's giving you an idea of the nature of this narrowing. And there are also more sophisticated tests. This is OCT. This is computerized tomography, optical computerized tomography, telling you what the inside of the artery looks like. Okay, and there are now even more sophisticated ways of trying to assess whether the plaque is unstable or not. Okay, this is just to highlight that technology is very rapidly advancing, and there really is hope for the future in trying to detect what some of these plaques look like. Because if you can detect a plaque that is unstable, you'll be able to do something about it. And there is SPECT, and there is MR, and you see you can put together a very nice risk profile and try and deal with each of these. So this you can do nothing about your age, but there's obesity, lifestyle, smoking, diet, lack of exercise. Then there are these all these risk factors I've talked about. There are local factors, there's inflammatory factors, and so on. You can put together a very nice atherothrombotic risk. The story begins with this chap here. He's my best friend, my best man. His name is Dawud Konochi Ahulu. Those of you who are in Ghana would recognize the name instantly, because the guy who was the clinical director for Institute of Clinical Genetics and was the world's leading expert on sickle cell disease. And he happens to be my mentor. This is his son, and he was my best friend. And I got a call from Dawud one afternoon, and he said to me, a friend of his that he went to school with is in a spot of bother. He's seen a cardiologist in Ghana, and he's been told that he needs something doing to his arteries. Would you please have a look? So I said, of course, get me his stuff. So Dawud got me his stuff. I had one look and said to Dawud, you got to get this chap anywhere. He needs an operation doing like yesterday, because this guy's in a bit of bother. I'll show you his angiogram, which is the pictures of his heart arteries in a minute. And this chap was clearly in a spot of bother. What you can't see is that the main artery supplying the left side of the heart is about 90% blocked, and the artery supplying the right side of his heart is 100% blocked. So this poor chap has got not very much blood going to his heart. So when Dawud told me, I said, well, look, listen, this guy needs to go anywhere. So get him somewhere. It transpires that the only place he could go that his doctor had recommended was India, and it was going to cost him something astronomical. And he said he didn't have the money, can't go. So Dawud then said to me, can he come over to your center in Cardiff, and would you operate on him? And I said, well, you know, the truth is that this guy really needs open heart surgery. But if there's nowhere else, then of course I'm going to operate on him. I'll have to do it. So we started applying for a visa for this poor chap. And the visa was turned down by the British government. They basically said, despite the fact that my friend had put down all the money that was needed for the operation, the UK government said this guy was going to elope. When he got to the airport, he was going to run away, so they weren't going to give him a visa. So it was one fine Friday morning, when Dawud called me and said, look, I think we need to reapply. As we were having this three-way conversation, finance department, me and Dawud, another phone call goes, and it's David Okai's hysterical wife saying, David has collapsed, he's had a heart attack, and is in big trouble. He's being taken to 37 hospital. Nobody survives a heart attack with that coronary anatomy. Nobody. Okay? One artery is completely blocked. The other one is 90% blocked. If you have a heart attack, by rights, you should be dead. So, Dawit calls me and says, well, this guy hasn't died. He's still on the ITU at 37 Hospital. So I said, oh, that's very interesting. So he said, how about we go to Ghana to operate? And I said, sorry, come again? He says, yeah, why about we go to Ghana and operate? I said, well, what do you mean go to Ghana and operate? Operate on where, who, where, what, how? And he said, well, if I find you a cath lab, which is where you do your operation, would you be able to do something? I have to be honest, at that point in time, I thought the guy had lost his mind. And I still don't quite understand why, but I said, well, I suppose so, I'm sure I could. It was a Friday, so he calls me back in an hour and said, look, I have contacted a doctor who's, in fact, is the only last operating cath lab, functioning cath lab in Ghana at the time. The Cardiothoracic Centre's cath lab was down, the operating theatres were down, and this was the only cath lab available. So I had to, you can well imagine, I had to try and gather a whole load of equipment to put in a bag to carry with me. Incidentally, what I haven't told you is that we didn't have any visas. My Ghanaian passport had run out. I traveled to Ghana in the January, but my visa had run out. I only was given a 3-month visa. So he didn't have a visa, I didn't have a visa. So we needed an emergency visa to go to Ghana. I needed special letters from clinical directors, from medical directors, from the president of the world, and all sorts of people to try and get some kind of, in case I was told at the airport, what are you doing with all this stuff, I also had to get all the kit, and I can assure you, if you're going to do this sort of operation, you need a whole lot of kit. So anyway, Saturday morning, I wake up, I load all this kit in my bag, and off I turn to the airport. They wouldn't let us go because apparently our visas were not the right visas. BA said if they allowed us to fly, they would not be indemnified. So I won't bore you with the details, but I can assure you it was extremely stressful. I nearly killed the BA attendant, nearly strangled him by saying, excuse me, I, quote, I am not going to have a pity party in Ghana. I'm going to save a life. I need to get on that flight now. And he says, look, listen, my dear friend, you look like a really nice chap. Okay? But you ain't getting on that flight. It's got nothing to do with me. The rules are very clear. You ain't getting nowhere on that flight. So you can imagine Dawit and I starting to think, look, we need an alternative plan here. We need to come up with something. Meanwhile, there were 1,000 phone calls going from one end of Accra through to Italy, through to... Everybody was calling everybody. It was fascinating. So gates were closed. We had to run with a BA person to get onto the flight. It's fascinating stuff. Fascinating. So, we get there. Now, somebody who's dying of a heart attack normally will be on a whole load of drugs. This chap was on aspirin and nothing else. And the reason why they'd done that was, quite frankly, because nobody really thought he was going to survive. They had given up on him and thought he was going to die. They'd heard about this hotshot cardiologist coming from the UK. They thought, yeah, right. This guy's going to die. He's not going to make the night. So why bother? Sort of idea. So I get there, looking at the chart, and that night, sent someone. It was after midnight at this stage. The chap's brother, no, actually it wasn't his brother. It was one of his close friends, who's he's a bit of a mean machine. Went to Movenpick. I have a pharmacy there. Knocked on the door. They were meant to have closed. There was luckily somebody in there, knocks on the door, and the guy says, we're closed. So he says, I need to get a drug. You need to open up. He says, look, go away. We're closed. You can imagine that friend nearly broke into that pharmacy to kill him. Basically, the look on his face And when the guy looked around, there were no security guards. He thought, I better open this pharmacy because this guy is probably going to kill me. So that evening, he got some drugs. And I haven't told you part of the other part of the story is that only cath lab I'm talking about, the only person with a key was in India. And when they phoned Dr. Naglate and said, look, listen, we need your lab. Enoch, my now very good friend, says, listen, I'm in India for a week. I've got all sorts of things to do. No, look, Enoch, this guy's dying. He's going to die. Enoch, by the way, knew the patient, said, so we told he's got to come down. You have got to come down. So thankfully, and he's one of the heroes of this story, agreed to take the next flight, which landed at 1 o'clock on the Sunday. So this is that day, the fateful day, and this, dear friends, is the cath lab. There are two bits of the story that are important. Number one, outside there was a cacophony. There was basically a church service going on out there with people praying. So anybody who didn't believe in God or the powers of heaven, well, I can assure you, this time, if I wasn't a believer, as it happens I am, but if I wasn't, I was certainly going to be a believer. There was a lot of prayers going on out there. And because the guy was awake, and I went through the rest, we were singing "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah," while I did the operation. I want to talk about erectile dysfunction, and you will see the connection in a second. But erectile dysfunction has been described as the inability to initiate, maintain penile erections sufficient for satisfactory sexual intercourse. Now, why is this important? The atherothrombotic process that I described to you that affects the heart, also affects the brain, affects arteries in the legs, affects arteries to the kidneys, and affects arteries to the penis. It affects arteries to every part of the body. In fact, as I say, the process is going on in the heart, same thing as the process is going on there. Well, it turns out that 60% of all my patients have erectile dysfunction. And it turns out that of those who have erectile dysfunction, which is due to a vascular cause, and 80% is due to a vascular cause. Of those, the vast majority end up having a heart attack. In fact, the maxim is that if you meet a man with erectile dysfunction, he's a heart patient until proven otherwise. Nearly 100% have had erectile dysfunction before they had their heart attacks. Nearly 100%. And there are reasons for that, which we can talk about later. But it also turns out that having erectile dysfunction is a marker for a lot of bad things. This is data from 93,000 patients. It's a meta-analysis, and what you see here is that if you compared in this particular data set, looking at all the trials, comparing patients with erectile dysfunction and those without erectile dysfunction, the risk of having a heart attack, 62% increased risk if you had ED. 44% increased risk in total cardiovascular events, 40% increased risk of stroke, and a 25% increase in all-cause death. So having ED is a particularly bad marker. In fact, if you look at other data sets, the risk attributable to ED is much bigger than that attributable to cigarette smoking, microalbuminuria, that's protein in your urine, and LDL cholesterol. In this particular data set, you see that smoking, the odds ratio, which is your risk of having coronary disease, was 5. Microalbuminuria is nearly 4. LDL cholesterol is 2.4. And you can see the strongest predictor, which was erectile dysfunction, was 15. And it is surprisingly common And the reason why you don't hear about it is because men don't want to talk about it. In the United Kingdom, some 13% at any one time will describe having erectile dysfunction. But these statistics, that statistic, is almost certainly an underestimate and hides a multitude of sins. In fact, if you look at this study, which is the Massachusetts male aging study of nearly 2,000 patients, it was 52%. So one half of these patients between the ages of 40 to 70 had some degree of erectile dysfunction, of which 36% had severe ED. So basically, don't travel to Massachusetts. But that's saying that among certain populations in the States, you're talking 1 in 2. That's if you look to your left or right, the man sitting next to you, they are 40, basically is going to have erectile dysfunction. That is a very important statistic. As long ago as 1839, John Elliotson, who wrote the first Principles and Practice of Medicine, describes in his section on diabetes, he says, there is one remarkable symptom, the loss of sexual power and desire. I've never found this symptom absent. And sometimes it's been the very first symptom noticed by the patient. So as long ago as 1839, you find John Elliotson describing that in his diabetic patients, the majority of them had erectile dysfunction. We now know that, of course, up to 75% of diabetic patients will have erectile dysfunction. In fact, if you find any person with ED, no symptoms at all, just a few cardiovascular risk factors, and you put them on a treadmill, you see here 60% of them have got positive treadmill testing, of which 20 of those have got significant coronary artery disease. If you look at the arteries of these patients, you will see that if you compare those with ED versus those without, there's a much higher preponderance of patients with calcium in their coronary arteries. And this is what it looks like. If you look at the artery supplying so-called John Thomas, for those of you who've lived abroad, this is the supplying the penis. You can see this is the internal pudendal artery. That is a narrowing of the artery supplying the ED. So, ED is a very powerful risk marker for for cardiovascular disease, and in fact, the narrowing going on elsewhere is often started in the arteries supplying the male organ. So, this thing is refusing to move. Okay. So how are we going to deal with this problem of cardiovascular risk? Well, you're going to treat it, okay? You're going to lower lipids, you're going to stop smoking, you're going to increase your exercise, treat your hypertension, weight reduce, glycemic control. The bottom line is that prevention is always better than cure. If you're dealing with any person with cardiovascular disease, everybody wants to do all manner of things and take lots of tablets and what have you. But actually, stopping smoking is much more important than anything I can do for you. Okay? Increasing your exercise, reducing your weight, eating properly, basically living sensibly and healthily is far more important than any number of stents that I can put in your coronary artery. There are tablets, of course, that will help to reduce these risks, and they are stated there. And it turns out that if you, as I told you before, risk factors tend to hunt in packs, they come together, and this particular data set compared intensive therapy to reduce all the cardiovascular risk compared to just conventional ways of dealing with it. It turns out that if you, at the end of 4 years, if you looked at intensive therapy was far more powerful than just treating conventionally. So reducing risk is very important. Role of aspirin I'm going to leave for now, and as well as statins. But there is things that we can do for erectile function. It's all stated here. These are tablets that we know work. There are prostaglandins that work very well. There are vacuum devices and penoprosthesis. But basically, there are things that can be done. So tell your uncles and papas and what have yous that there is lots of hope for them. Okay? Now, if all fails, Then there are a few drugs that I've developed in my own laboratory. This was in my kitchen, on my kitchen table. Here goes. There is my cocks are flopping. There is my cocks are failing. There is my dicks are drooping. There is my dicks are rising. There is simply Dixafix. Then there is my dicks are dud. There is my dicks are throbbing. And finally, there is I'll be poking.